Hi class, and welcome to your next video on environmental legislation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the laws that are in place and what our government does in order to keep our earth clean and actually to help us clean up even more. So the first things we want to talk about are the National Environmental Policy Act, or the main cornerstone of our environmental legislation. So well-publicized disasters and overwhelming support of Earth Day movement led to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970. At this same time, we formed the Environmental Protection Agency known as the EPA. So in 1970, we formed the EPA also. So the National Environmental Policy Act requires the federal government to consider the environmental impacts of proposed federal actions, such as financing highway or dam construction. It also provides the basis for developing a detailed environmental impact statement, which is a document that describes the nature and purpose of the proposal. It is short and long-term environmental effects and possible alternatives that would create fewer adverse effects. So, these statements are used all throughout our governments. And at one time, the courts decreed that the environmental impact statements had to thoroughly analyze the environmental consequences of any anticipated projects on soil, water, and endangered species, and that the environmental impact statements would need to be made available to the public. So these rulings really were harsh for the National Environmental Policy Act. Particularly because the public could then scrutinize everything that was going on with it, which placed pretty intense pressure on the federal agencies with respect to the findings of these environmental impact statements. So the National Environmental Policy Act established the Council on Environmental Quality to monitor all of these statements and to report directly to the president based on this court ruling. And so since 1970, there have been few federal activities that have been initiated with some sort of environmental review. But specifically, the National Environmental Policy has influenced environmental legislation in 36 of our states, and it's been the cornerstone for many other countries. So it's really been something great for not only our country, but for other countries as well. And the National Environmental Policy Act revolutionized the environmental protection in the United States. It created federal agencies that now manage flood and erosion for us, public works, construction of our highways, all kinds of things that we need and that are going to actually help us through our environment and everything that we need with our environment. So what are these environmental regulations? Well, these environmental regulations, the United States has passed federal laws, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Resource Conservation Recovery Act to serve as the foundation of environmental management. So we really want to clean up our entire environment for all that live in the United States and all of the world in order to be able to provide a nice, clean atmosphere to everyone. And so we've passed these acts that help regulate what we need, what is the minimum that we need to have clean air, to have clean water. And the people who actually enforce that is the Environmental Protection Agency, like I said, was formed in 1970, and they're going to report directly to the president. It is in the executive branch of the federal government, and it is responsible for translating the law's language into specific regulations. So they're the ones that are going to say, okay, based on this law, this is what we need to have in our water. This is what we need to have with our cars. They're the ones that are going to tell us exactly what we need. And we need to be able to pass these regulations. So what has this actually done for us, though? There have been many accomplishments of these environmental legislations. Since Earth Day in 1970, Congress has updated or passed almost 40 major environmental laws that address a wide range of issues, not only endangered species. A lot of people think Save the Whales, Greenpeace, but they also don't necessarily think of themselves. Clean water, clean air, energy conservation, hazardous waste, pesticides, DDT, all of these things that we were dumping and we didn't necessarily know how to deal with it. And so the EPA actually helped us deal with it, and through these environmental laws, we now knew how to deal exactly with it. So since 1970, the EPA has helped to establish 15 national parks, a national wilderness preservation system, which now totals more than 44 million hectares. So we usually think of acres. Well, a hectare is actually 100 acres. So 44 million hectares. Millions of hectares of farmland susceptible to erosion have been withdrawn from production, reducing erosion, which actually helps our farmland and helps our production of food. And then many endangered species are recovering. They're coming off of the endangered species list. And the American alligator, California gray willow, and bald eagle have been removed from the endangered species list since 1970. So according to the 2008 EPA report on the environment, emissions of 6 important air pollutants have dropped by more than 25% since 1990. However, carbon dioxide still continues to rise. Levels of wet sulfate, a major component of acid rain, has dropped by 20 to 35% since 1990. And in 2007, almost 90% of the U.S. population got its drinking water from community water systems with no violations of EPA standards, up from 75% in 1993. So we're really taking these standards and we're elevating ourselves. In 2008, 45% of the municipal solid waste generated in the United States was combusted for energy recovery and recovered from composting or recycling. Now, municipal solid waste is what you throw in the trash. Anything that's solid that goes in the trash is your municipal solid waste. What we did was we took that trash and we said, okay, we can compost this. That means we have energy that's stored because it's organic. That means that it was grown or it was living. And then the other part is we could recycle it. It could be reused in one way, shape, or form. So we use those in order to recover as much as we can and stop throwing away a lot of that solid waste. And then in 2007, the EPA considered human exposures to contamination to be under control at 93% of the 1,968 listed hazardous waste sites. So, last thoughts. In the 1960s and 70s, pollution was obvious. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, burst into flames several times from oily pollutants on its surface. Legislators and media perceived this as a serious threat, and laws were made to clean it up. So, our current problem is climate change. And it hasn't become very obvious yet. We don't have rivers bursting into flames. So what scientists think is we have to have something big happen. Once something big happens, the public will pressure the legislators, will pressure the media for something to happen. But that has to happen first. So go ahead and do your concept check, and there is a Wiley Plus for you to complete.